Members, good morning. We formed a quorum and it's also the appointed time for our meeting. May I call meeting to order? We have two things to deal with this morning. First, that is the issues involving the request for Mr. Kenneth LEUNG to resign from this subcommittee. By way of background, on the 18th of May, Mr. Wong Kwok-kin wrote to this subcommittee to demand that Mr. Kenneth LEUNG resign from this select committee, and our secretariat and also our legal division colleagues explained that even if the motion was passed, it was not really binding. And then on the 22nd of May, Mr. Leung wrote to this subcommittee to explain or to make a declaration on the civil litigation in progress in between himself and Mr. CY Leung. And before we proceed, may I ask Mr. Leung once again, are you willing to provide the writ of summons of this case to the subcommittee and also relevant documents and background information for us? Chairman, first I have to declare interest. I have an ongoing civil lawsuit on defamation with Mr. CY Leung, and the document is an open one. The statement of claim from Mr. CY Leung is an open document. And the crux of the litigation is whether the relevant Inland Revenue Authority is conducting an investigation into Mr. CY Leung's issue, and that's all in the document. And of course it is purely a voluntary move if you would like members to have to be better informed of the progress of the litigation, because the statement of claims was only introduced at a later stage, and members of the public may not be able to have access to it. And if you're willing to tell us the cause of the litigation and your answer or response, well, it is entirely a voluntary move. And Mr. Wong Kwok-kin, since you are the initiator of this matter, to be fair, I'll give you the floor to see whether you will continue. You will insist on your request. Speakers off mic. I am the complainant of the alleged corruption case of Mr. CY Leung, so I have to declare every time. Thank you. Mr. Wong Kwok-kin. First, I have to declare that I have this is not directed against Mr. Kenneth Leung, so it is entirely about the matter itself, because this is a select committee set up to look into the UGL matter where Mr. CY Leung is the subject. There is a lawsuit ongoing in between Mr. Leung, Mr. Kenneth Leung, and Mr. CY Leung. I think even prima facie we can see that it is unfair. A is suing B, and B is in a select committee to inquire into the conduct of A. You may say that there is no conflict of interest. I have no personal grudge. Well, while I trust Mr. Kenneth Leung, I think there is bound to be a problem when public perception is concerned. It would also affect the credibility of our select committee. We are inquiring into matters about Mr. CY Leung, and yet there is a lawsuit ongoing between a member of this select committee and Mr. CY Leung, and it would be an excellent reason for the subject of investigation not to cooperate with this select committee in the provision of documents, for instance, because he may feel that there is someone in this select committee with a direct conflict of interest. And therefore, this is the ground why I ask Mr. Kenneth Leung to resign. I know there is nothing in our ROP to force him to do so. It is entirely his decision. The Pandems have always asked that the select committee starts this inquiry as soon as possible, and we should do so in accordance with the procedures. That being the case, if there are factors affecting the operation of the select committee, they should be avoided as far as possible. And in a closed door session, we asked the chairman as well as the legal advisor, because Mr. Kenneth Leung said that he had consulted the chairman as well as the legal advisor, and both were of the view that there was no conflict of interest. Of course, both gave us an account in a closed meeting. But because this is an open meeting, may I invite the chairman as well as the legal advisor to share with us your judgment of the matter. First. Thank you. You mentioned 5 points. I don't really want to rehash what was said in in a closed door meeting, unless there are compelling reasons to do so. So I don't really have strong views. I don't really have anything to share. Legal advisor. In a closed meeting, what was said by the chairman, the secretary, or the legal advisor should not be made public here. So, chairman, is for you to decide whether we should give an account here. We like to say that we should be transparent, and Mr. Kenneth Leung told the media in public that he had consulted both the chairman and the legal advisor, and both felt that there was no direct conflict of interest to be a member of the SC. So perhaps you should take this opportunity to give an account to the public. 3 points. First, we should be forward-looking as far as possible so that we can go back to the right track. This is not a coroner's inquest. And secondly, regarding the remarks made by Mr. Kenneth Leung in the public, I think I also said something in the public domain, and what happened was really water under the bridge, and so Mr. Kenneth Leung had already declared to the SC, and I think unless absolutely necessary, I don't think we should deal with matters of the past. Dr. Junius Ho, again, I have no personal view, but I support Mr. K.K. Wong on this matter. How does the public look at this thing and the litigation between Mr. Kenneth Leung and Mr. CY Leung has just started, and Mr. CY Leung is the subject of an inquiry. So we should avoid possible or perceived conflict of interest as far as possible. Kenneth said that the documents in relation to his litigation were public documents. Well, there is nothing secretive about his documents. It was something that should have been declared, but it wasn't. So that is one thing. And the litigation is still in progress. So the lawsuit is not really water under the bridge, and we have to deal with this matter so that there will not be any defect in our report. I think there is every advantage for Mr. Kenneth Leung to leave this SC, but if he insists on being a member here, then there will be perceived conflict of interest, and he might do something that attract criticism. To protect himself and the SC and our credibility, it is best that Kenneth resign from the SC. Of course, I respect our legal advisor's view that a motion passed here is non-binding, and it is just a SC set up under the House Committee. Well, I do not go by this view entirely. We have to have our own position. Although any motion passed here is not binding, there is nothing to force Mr. Kenneth Leung to go. I think what we do here will be convincing. So may I ask Kenneth not to continue to persist. I think it is best that he resigned from this SC and we have another member to fill his place. Now, I'm not saying that this matter should not be discussed, and I was just saying that there was no need for myself and the legal advisor to repeat remarks made in a closed meeting, and that's what on the bridge I meant. Legal advisor. Regarding Mr. Wong Kwok-kin's inquiry, may I look at it from this perspective? That is a declaration of interest under ROP. Under our ROP, 83A is relevant. When a member has to speak or to move a motion or amendment to a motion in relation to a member to a matter, and if he has a direct or indirect pecuniary interest, he has to declare the nature of the interest involved. There is nothing more in this ROP to define what is meant by a direct or indirect pecuniary interest. Paper CMI 10, 12, 13. Well, we have this paper here. It is for individual members to judge whether they have a direct or indirect pecuniary interest in a matter under consideration at the relevant meeting of the council and committees. So, whether a member has to declare a direct or indirect pecuniary interest in the matter under consideration at some meeting is the member's own decision. It is not appropriate for the Secretariat to give any advice on whether a declaration is warranted. It is entirely the member's decision.
May I add that the reason behind this is, maybe members can consider that. For members, they will be in the best position to know exactly whether they need to declare interest or not. And second, if someone has a query on whether the members should declare an interest, and they can actually lodge a complaint with the CMI, and the CMI, if needed, can start an inquiry. And there are also provisions relating to penalty as well. So in a nutshell, whether members should declare interest in accordance with the rules of procedure, that will be, say, decided upon by the CMI, and the Secretary General will not provide an advice to members on that regard. After all, it will be up to the members themselves to decide on this. Dr. Priscilla Leung. Chairman, as to whether Mr. Kenneth Leung can still stay on the committee, apart from looking at the ROP, and Wong Kwok-kin, fifth point on whether I and the legal advisor should make public the discussions held at the closed meeting. Well, we need to discuss that, and if we make a decision on that, then we can proceed further with the agenda items. We don't have to rehash the old discussions. I think it's all related. It's easy for us to state our position, but I think there is still something that we should give a clear account of to the public. Now, in relation to conflict of interest, I must say that the legal advisors said that we should look at RLP, but under common law, there is this clear principle, especially for decision makers in public bodies, in relation to avoiding conflict of interest. Apart from a situation whether you are biased for someone you are very familiar with, there is also a scenario of biased against, and that has to do with hatred and hostility. And these are, or there are clear provisions under common law, or clear principles under common law. Maybe you have, say, political grudges against someone else, but these should not be considered by us. Now, in the LegCo, all of us have political party background. But if there is a lawsuit going on, the person concerned will be put into an embarrassing position. And this person is inquiring into the subject of inquiry, and for a reasonable third party, he will believe that there will be strong hostility between the two parties. So what is a risk to this select committee? When the select committee has made a decision in the future, and if we agree to Mr. Kenneth Leung staying on, our decision will be challenged by people. Since Mr. Kenneth Leung said that chairman and legal advisor have agreed that he can stay on, and he is not required to make an open declaration, then this is something that we should be careful about, because our decision in the future may be challenged. Mr. Wong Kwok-kin takes a political perspective, and Dr. Leung takes a legal perspective on the matter. Of course, I know in defamation law there is the concept of bias, and well, I'm very clear about this, and that can affect the situation. Will there be a possibility of judicial review of our decisions? Will our decisions be challenged? It's not just a political consideration. Legal advisor. Now, whether we will be subject to judicial review, members may know that anyone can lodge a judicial review, and this is, quite common, and the possibilities is always there. But if you talk about the content of the report, let's be forward-looking. According to the P&P ordinance, and the content compiled by the select committee and also the remarks made by members will be protected under the P&P ordinance. So the court should not be interfering with the matter. And may I add that since Dr. Priscilla Leung mentioned something about common law, we have made certain studies. If, say, in a court case or tribunal case, if they make a ruling, if our decision is being challenged, will the court or tribunal be in a position to make a decision? One of the considerations is bias. There are two types. One is a apparent bias, another is a substantive bias. So from the perspective of the court, there are indeed case laws. Well, let me invoke some principles in English.
That the relevant circumstances, as ascertained by the court, will lead a fair-minded and informed observer to conclude that there was a real possibility that the tribunal had been biased. 即係簡單即係去中文去總結啦，即係其實就係講緊喺法庭。
So after having considered all the relevant circumstances, whether the fair-minded observer will think that the tribunal will have bias. So that's the principle under the common law invoked by a court or tribunal in making a ruling, and this is generally applicable to all cases. This is not just applicable to a court case, and this is premised on the principle of fairness and natural justice. And these principles are not set in stone. They will be adjusted depending on the context. So we'll have to consider the specific circumstances of the relevant cases to see whether these principles can apply and how to apply these principles. Now, there are some exceptional cases or circumstances. Say, for example, for committees which are responsible for town planning, there are some case laws on that. If some members of that kind of committee has a certain stance on an issue and has made public his stance in these matters, then there are case laws pointing out that the member would not be barred from taking part in the decision despite the fact that he has made such remarks openly, as long as the committee has the duty to act fairly and has taken on board all the circumstances before making a ruling. So that's no problem with that, unless the member is found to have an closed mind. That is to say, the relevant member has a closed mind on the issues, and he will not consider all the relevant factors in coming to his own stance. So in that kind of circumstance, there are case laws saying that this member concerned should not take part in the handling of the case. So that's the principles under common law. I believe that we all have our stance, but then we should still have an open mind. I believe all of us will embrace that attitude. Now, 11 members here. Now, six of us have the legal background, and we also have a legal advisor. I'm sure that you can make your own decision. I don't think I will have to ask the legal advisor to make further presumptions in relation to the case. I'm sure you can make up your own mind. So, Mr. Kenneth Leung, do you want to say? Dr. Priscilla Leung, you want to say anything further? As I said at the outset, if somebody has strong views, that would not be a reason why that person has to withdraw from the committee. But then, if there is a lawsuit, for public bodies which are subject to judicial review, that point has to be taken on board. The person involved has first to disclose whether he is suing somebody or he's being sued by others. In case of a lawsuit, the indirect pecuniary interest may be involved, say, for example, the litigation costs and also compensation to be dished out in the future. So this will be in the mind of the decision maker, right? There may be apparent likelihood of bias or really real bias. So that's people's perception of you. Well, maybe the father doesn't have any bias towards the son, but for a reasonable third party, he may think that there will be a high possibility of indirect pecuniary interest involved, and the bias is so great that the select committee must take on board, even if the member decides not to withdraw from the committee. Well, we must make clear our stance that we don't like the member participating in our decision making. Mr. Lam Chok-ting. I would like to respond briefly to the few points made by the pro-establishment members. First, Mr. Wong Kwok-kin said that if Mr. Kenneth Leung stays on the subject of inquiry, Mr. CY Leung can use that as a pretext of not cooperating with the SC or even not attending the inquiry sessions in the future. If the subject of inquiry refuses to cooperate, well, maybe we should seek to invoke PNP and discuss at the full council, so that he will be made to cooperate. Well, but then because of the pro-establishment putting up some hurdles, we're not able to invoke PNP. And he said that Mr. Kenneth Leung is involved in direct pecuniary interest, and he has a direct conflict of interest as a result. Now let's look at ROP in relation to conflict of interest. We talk about direct or indirect pecuniary interest. And Dr. Leung that said since there is a lawsuit, there may be indirect conflict of interest involved. I believe that the public can see clearly how we work. Mr. Kenneth Leung's remarks and his votes are under the scrutiny of the public all the time. Now, the greatest problem if we set this precedent, and that is to say, if a member of SM, as a select committee, is being sued in a civil court case, and he has to leave the select committee as a result, then that's going to be problematic. Now, Dr. Leung, you are the chairperson of the select committee, looking into Dr. Chang Chung-tai's case. Maybe if there is a lawsuit involving Dr. Zhang, then once the lawsuit starts, should we be asking Dr. Leung to withdraw from the chairmanship of the select committee? Should we be using the same yardstick? I don't think that should be the case. We have 4 pan-democratic members here, and in the past few years, every one of us has kept criticizing the governance of CY Leung, his integrity, his involvement in the UGL case, etc. So he has every reason to start a defamation lawsuit against us. So if he really does that, does it mean that all 4 of us have to resign from the committee? Now, starting from the 6th of March, the court case started, and up to May, no pro-establishment member ever said openly that Mr. Kenneth Leung, you have a conflict of interest, there may be pecuniary interest involved, and why don't you resign? Well, for 2 entire months, you haven't raised that query at all.
And then the change came when Holden Chow was found to be colluding with CY Leung to amend the proposed areas of study of this SC. It's not until then that the pro-establishment camp claimed that there is a conflict of role and interest on the part of Mr. Kenneth Leung. So it was just a tactic to divert the attention of the public, and because it's really started to continue to target at Kenneth Leung so as to stall the work of the SC and to undermine the credibility of this SC. the public in front of the TV can see what we're doing, and if Kenneth Leung is unfair, the public can see it. That's all I have to say. Mr. Wong Kwok-kin. Having heard Mr. Lam Cheuk-ting's remarks, I want to make the following response. First, Lam Cheuk-ting said that under the eyes of the public, there is no worry of conflict of interest. I remember Pan-Democrats using this excuse to require chairman of FC, Mr. Chan Kim-po, to refrain from chairing a meeting because there's conflict of interest. So how come there are double standards here? Secondly, Mr. Lam Cheuk-ting, you said that all four of you had strong criticisms of CY. Now, as we said, we are not just talking about criticisms, but a very real lawsuit. So this is not about your perception or your bias referred to by Priscilla Leung. That's a separate matter. And thirdly, you queried how come in between in those 2 months none of us said anything. It might very possibly that we really missed that point. We never realized at that point, and this is something not unexpected, and now we discover our omission, and then we pointed out. And I think Mr. Lam Cheuk-ting is being rather far-fetched. When he said that if the subject refused to be cooperative because of Kenneth Leung's matter, we should invoke the PNP. Well, we refused to invoke the PNP because the whole thing lacked substantive evidence, and so we disagreed to the use of PNP because there wasn't even a prima facie case. An investigation by a law enforcement agency, that's a separate matter. At least the majority of this council agreed that PNP should not be invoked. And if we invoke PNP all because of Kenneth Leung's incident, this is really rather far-fetched, and I think it is for the public to judge. Well, we are quite interested in this matter, and members are very eager to speak, so I didn't set any time limit. But in order not to keep members waiting for too long, let's have set a time, all right? 5 minutes? Mr. Alvin Young, first time, thank you. Chairman, I'm really enlightened by Mr. Wong Kwok-kin. Now, that is his logic. Well, you asked Chan Kim-po to leave because there is conflict of interest. We felt that there was no conflict of interest, so we allowed him to stay. So the pro-establishment camp felt that there was no conflict of interest on the part of Mr. Chan Kim-po, and you asked him to stay. Well, I don't want any immediate responses from all 7 members in one go. That will be very exciting. And then Mr. Chan Kim-po did refrain from chairing a meeting when there was a conflict of interest. And on many occasions he refused and he stayed on. So I'd like to know which yardstick you're talking about. So on this occasion, you talk about the case of, are you comparing Mr. Kenneth Leung to the situation where Chan Kim-po left or to the situation when he stayed? We've yet to hear an immediate response. Now, if the SC is already set up by voting in the HC with the support of the pro-establishment camp, is already a fact that the SC is established and the public knows who are members of the LSC, and then all of a sudden the subject of inquiry raised a lawsuit of defamation against one of the members here. So what is your yardstick? Why should a member of the SC be the victim? Why a member of the SC should be required to withdraw at this point? I'd like to know your logic and also your yardstick. So it's not that all members would comment on this matter outside the select committee. Members raised the subject of Chen Kim-po's chairing FC. The legal advisor talked about the legal basis. May I defer to him? To avoid misunderstanding, may I draw members' attention to the following. A member referred to the situation in FC, Finance Committee. It is a different scenario. First, the question is about whether the chairman should continue to chair a meeting. It's different from a member of this SC should declare or should continue to be a member of this SC. The two are different matters. In Para 13 of the Rules of Procedures for the FC, there are very clear provisions. And it is explicitly stated that if the chairman feels or the Finance Committee decides that he should not continue to chair that part of the meeting, he should defer to the deputy chairman or member to chair that meeting because he is unable to act. This is Para 13 of the rules for the FC. And there were occasions when the chairman of a committee dealt with a case when whether he should continue to chair a meeting. Sometimes the chairman might decide to not to continue to act, and on some other occasions, although he could not act as the chairman, he could continue to deal with the matter in question as a member of the committee. So these are some precedents for your information. Thank you. Mr. Andrew Wen. Just simple responses. So we have discussed the point on conflict of interest is not something provided for in the ROP, and as for bias, I don't see any major disparity in view between the Pandems and also the pre-establishment members. Well, I raised my hand because I was enlightened by Mr. Wong Kwok-kin, because he hasn't responded to the second point of Mr. Alvin Young's questions. Second, when there is a lawsuit, is it an important factor? Now, we're not talking about conflict of interest, rather conflict of role or incompatibility. So how do our rules of procedure deal with this? I have every confidence in Kenneth Leung myself. And last time I raised an issue. I think this is a species argument. If this happens, then it will become a precedent. It will be a trap for ourselves in the future. So I'd like to hear Priscilla Leung's response to the question asked by Mr. Kenneth Leung. If the same happens in another committee, as the chairman, will Priscilla Leung agree to act according to the same standard? Unfortunately, although we're only 1 year into this term, for procedures initiated by members, whether it is censorship or reprimand, we have quite a lot of them, so we have to be careful indeed. Dr. Junius Ho, I'm enlightened by Alvin Young. He asked, how come the question was not answered? He asked whether a member would be automatically disqualified from being a member of a select committee once a lawsuit is started. My answer to this question is no, but you have to understand that under our declaration of interest system, we have to declare interest right from the beginning, and that's the starting point of our system. And as our meetings proceed, there may be substantive changes in many things, and the person concerned has to declare interest again. Perhaps Mr. Kenneth Leung didn't see the need to declare interest, and he also said so to the public. Perhaps he has forgotten to declare the matter, and then subsequently we saw the need, and he declared interest afterwards. And whether he could continue his membership here after declaration is the third thing, and we have to look at the gravity of the matter. So, Mr. CY Leung, in relation to what Kenneth Leung said on the 1st of March outside the chamber, whether CY Leung should be investigated by by Inland Revenue authorities because of the UGL matter. So we have expressed our positions on whether Mr. Kenneth Leung should continue to be a member. I think we have to put this item to a vote sooner or later. Prior to that, you want us to have a thorough discussion of this matter. And in response to the legal advisor's view as to whether the whole thing would cause prejudice or bias, well, this is such a matter of grave concern to some members of these SC, and if we are uncomfortable about it and we're going to pass a resolution to ask him to leave, and if he insists to stay on, it will taint the inquiry. So it's not just to protect the reputation and integrity of the SC, it's also to protect Kenneth Leung himself. There is possible, or there might be perceived conflict of interest. There is no need for him to stay on, because if he leaves, it is good for himself, and it will also allay public's concern. So it's not because of a summons issued afterwards, but we have to view that because of the change of that change, he has to declare interest, and we have to decide whether it is serious enough and whether it is appropriate for him to stay on. Most of us are thinking that it is inappropriate.
And the legal advisor said that any resolution will not be legally binding, but I don't think it's right for him really to stay on. But we haven't put that to the vote yet. Well, you mentioned that if Mr. Kenneth Leung stays on, we would be compelled to pass a motion, and as a result, the committee will be brought to shame because of this. I just want to seek a clarification from you, whether you think that shame will be brought to the select committee when Mr. Kenneth Leung stays on, or when Mr. Kenneth Leung chooses to stay on despite that we pass a resolution asking him to leave. All right, I think we have to come to a conclusion one way or another. If the majority's decision is that he should leave and he disregards that decision and he stays on, then shame will be brought to the select committee. The select committee has made the decision. He's not following the decision. Well, like last time, we passed a motion for everyone to make a statutory declaration. But if, say, nobody follows it, then does it mean that shame will be brought upon us? Well, if that is the case, do you think we should rather not pass the motion or resolution because you're talking about something that is self-defeating? Well, I would like to raise this at AOB actually. Since we have full discussion and come to a decision and we decided that we should make a statutory declaration to the effect that we are not the ones leaking the information, then that can help us resolve the problem we talked about. Now, we passed this motion. It is non-binding, though. And if members are willing to sign such a declaration, a statutory declaration, then that can help clarify things. That will take us a step forward in that matter. Now, if you say that somebody signs and others not sign, then it's self-defeating. No, I don't think that's the right thinking. We try to resolve the problem step by step. So in order not to be criticized in the future, we will have our discussion now, and then we will try to forestall any problems. Well, let's not put any matter easily to the vote, because the shame originally brought to a member will be brought to the committee as a whole if we do that. Mr. Lam Chuk-ting, Dr. Priscilla Leung is a chairwoman of the select committee looking into Dr. Chang Chung-tai's issue, and Mr. Junior So is in fact the vice chairman of that committee. Mr. Ho has given us some new grounds, new views, which you've never heard before. Earlier, you said that you have a lawsuit going on, you have a potential conflict of interest, and you will affect public perception, so you have to resign. But then I mentioned that Dr. Priscilla Leung is a chairwoman of the committee looking into Dr. Chang Chung-tai's case, and if Dr. Chang Chung-tai takes out a lawsuit against Dr. Leung, should she resign? Then they moved the goalposts immediately. They narrowed the width of the goalposts so much, so the ball could never get into the goal. Because for all the select committees, they are dominated by pro-established members. So it would be for the select committees to decide whether Mr. Kenneth Leung should stay on, and if the majority of the members believe that he should go, then he should go, or else shame will be brought upon the select committee. You are moving the goalposts so outrageously. I am stunned by what they said. Let's use the same yardstick. So whoever is involved in a lawsuit, he should leave a certain committee. Well, let's use the same yardstick. So don't move the goalposts so rapidly. Well, get prepared for the remarks that I'm going to make to counter your arguments. from the political or legal perspectives, we have a lot of discussions on the matter. So I would like to give time for everyone to speak freely, and that's my style. But then we still face time constraint, and we have a next agenda item to deal with. So can I now ask Mr. Stephen Ho to speak for the first time? I believe that members will not be interested in so much in the next agenda item. Well, I understand that. Well, you see, we had such lively discussions here from the outset. We know that different members have their own political views, and that's inevitable. I hope that the discussions can be based on facts. Second, we discussed whether Mr. Kenneth LEUNG should withdraw or resign from the committee. Sorry, I'm talking about Mr. Kenneth LEUNG, not Dr. Priscilla Leung. In the past several months, Mr. Kenneth LEUNG has made a lot of remarks publicly. I think it would be, of course, up to the court to decide whether to decide on the ruling of the lawsuit. But I think members should refrain from making publicly remarks which would lead to misunderstanding. Now, people refer to Dr. Priscilla Leung's case, whether she should withdraw from the other committee. But if you start a lawsuit, there is a certain threshold that you should meet, and also you have to be reasonable. So whether you stand any chance of success in a lawsuit, then that's something that is the individual's decision. Now, as somebody mentioned about Mr. Chan Kin-po, he is in the insurance industry. He is in, and his business covers a wide portfolio, and sometimes he leaves from, and sometimes he stays on at the meeting. But we are talking about UGL this time. Mr. Kenneth LEUNG has made some defamatory remarks against Mr. CY LEUNG in relation to UGL. And as what Dr. Priscilla Leung said, some pecuniary interest may be involved. So I think it's preferable for Mr. Leung to resign so that the work of the select committee work can proceed more smoothly. We have a lot of related issues relating to this UGL case already. Is there any member who wishes to speak who has not yet spoken? If not, then I will ask Mr. Kenneth LEUNG and Mr. Wong Kwok-kin to speak for the last time, then we'll come to a conclusion. Dr. Priscilla Leung. Thank you. I thank everyone for having a very good and in-depth discussions here. I participated in the work of many public bodies, including the Legislative, and involved in their inquiry cases to inquiry into the various issues. In Legislative, we have the Lehman Brothers and Leung Chun-ming's inquiry. For PMP, it means that members' remarks in certain inquiry committees will be protected under PMP, and you would not be sued. But that doesn't mean that the decision of the select committee will not be subject to any judicial review. Ms. Li Feng-ying was the subject of a judicial review in relation to Leung Chun-ming's inquiry. They have judicial grounds for doing that. And the issues at stake are sometimes related to whether we have done enough to avoid conflict of interest. In relation to PNP, it doesn't mean that everything will be immune or protected, especially in relation to procedure. Sometimes we are not immune. If I said something and I may be taken to the court for a lawsuit of defamation. For myself, I've been sued for at least 5 times, and in most of the cases, mediation was achieved. There was this major case. I was involved in representing some 40 employees taking their former employers to court. Well, you can easily take people to court. You can send letters, lawyers' letters to a lot of people. But we'll have to see whether really a lawsuit will be started. And for this lawsuit involving Mr. CY Leung and Mr. Kenneth Leung, Mr. Kenneth Leung will know what the facts of the case are really are. Well, if he made certain public remarks, there is a risk of being taken to court. Second, maybe you receive a lawyer's letter. Well, you should declare interest. And Mr. Kenneth Leung missed that. It doesn't necessarily mean he has to resign. He has to resign from the committee. But it's not just a lawyer's letter. This time is a real lawsuit. I have sat on many committees, and the committees would definitely discuss this matter and decide on whether it is appropriate for the member to stay on if there is a lawsuit. I'm not being personal against Mr. Kenneth Leung, and nobody is in a position to decide whether there is a real bias or what. But a reasonable third party or third person, what his perception will be, that is something that we should be mindful about. And of course, the opposition camp members would insist that he stays on, and say he can stay on until the day when really there is indeed a writ. And I think you should seriously consider whether you should stay on, because that will be a real conflict of interest. That's all I want to say. Now, let me seek a clarification from you. You are saying that people should declare their interest when they receive a lawyer's letter. Well, grudges may be involved. Well, you are raising this based on the rule of procedure or what? Well, I'm raising this based on the principles under common law. In public bodies, I've been involved in so many similar cases involving conflict of interest, declaration of interest. And we usually say that once you receive a lawyer's letter, you should declare an interest. It's just about a declaration of interest. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person has to withdraw from the committee.
Sure. Whether he should really resign will depend on the grudge and also the seriousness of the grudge. Now, we all know Dr. Priscilla Leung's background. She is a professor or a lecturer. So I'd like to supplement on the point from Mr. Alfred Young, if you may allow me. Mr. Young said once the SC was set up, could members be replaced because of that? Well, it did happen when we had the SC on Lehman's brothers. Some members decided to withdraw because of the risk involved. If I remember correctly, it was because we all want to join. Chairman, I don't know whether you're a member of the SC. I myself was. Mr. Albert Ho was one of the members who joined the committee or the SC, and then after a few weeks he found out that he was handling some Lehman Brothers cases. He withdrew, and then there were some of the members, well, not because they were lazy. Many of them insisted until the very end. Well, legal advisor, what if frivolous letters from lawyers, would that have to be declared? We have something new every day. I don't know whether it is an example or what. I think members know the ROP well. Regarding declaration of interest, I will not repeat what's said in ROP 83.8. And then our members talked about not just pecuniary interest, but possible conflict of roles. There are no explicit provisions in the RLP on how to deal with possible conflict of roles. For members' information, whether a member can continue to chair a certain committee, there was such a discussion in the Committee on Rules of Procedures. If a member from a sector chairs a meeting, and if the subject directly affects that sector, we have precedence on whether the member was fit to continue to act as the chairman, and there is nothing in the RLP to forbid it. And after discussion by the Committee on Rules of Procedure, it was decided that no amendment to the RLP should be made. Thank you. Mr. Wong Kwok, speaking for the first time. Thank you, Chairman. Regarding Mr. Kenneth Leung's position, whether it is in our closed-door meetings or in open meetings or privately, I have shared my views already. Whether there is a possible conflict of interest, I think is very obvious as regards how we interpret the situation. I think the legal advisor has said a number of times that no one can force a member to withdraw. It's very clear. And Mr. Kenneth Leung has already submitted a written declaration afterwards. So there is no argument that a declaration is warranted. The reason why I joined this SC is to find out the truth ASAP, to give an account to the public, and to do justice to the subject concerned. So we should start our inquiries ASAP. Now, this is nothing against Mr. Kenneth Leung personally. If he really feels that there is no problem and he wants to stay, there is nothing we can do about it. We can only respect his wish. But there is no preventing another member who feels that his membership will impact negatively on the work of the inquiry. He can take whatever action he deems appropriate. I think I've said to Mr. Kenneth Leung that the best is for him to withdraw. But if he doesn't go by this, then there is no preventing a member from taking whatever action he wants. So we are on the defensive and aggressive in this SC. I think this is totally unnecessary. May I remind you, Chairman, that you should not comment too much or try to interpret viewpoints made by members here. Your most important role is to lead us to clarify our views, and after that you should lead us into making a decision. This is what the chair should do. So I hope we can have this done with, and then we can go into the inquiry. Otherwise it will be procrastination. I think we should address this matter ASAP, and then under your leadership we can start our inquiry. Well, I should go by your suggestion. I should respond, but since you named me, I have to clarify this. I really want to narrow down our differences and also to help members to clarify viewpoints that we don't understand entirely. If you think that I have commented on your viewpoints excessively, I apologize. What I really want to is to help you to clarify your remarks. All right, I agree with Mr. Ma Fung Kwok. We should return to our subject ASAP. So I should allow Mr. Kenneth Leung to have the last say, and then Mr. Wong Kwok-kin will once again explain to us his motion. Mr. Kenneth Leung, I hope you won't be too restrictive with regard to the time I'm allowed to speak, because I have to respond to views made by this SC and also the public. Now, I want to remind you that, Chairman, this is not really a case, as you call it. It's just a discussion. There are 6 points based on the legal and also some other aspects. On matter of jurisprudence, the legal advisor mentioned ROP 83A a number of times, and that is, we have to declare a pecuniary interest, whether direct or indirect. This is what is explicitly stated in the ROP. Now I am in the middle of a defamation lawsuit, and this is something not covered in the ROP. And I have to explain why. On the 2nd of May, I submitted a letter to the SC. It's just a management of expectations. In my letter dated the 22nd of May, I said, so the declaration is entirely voluntary. I am not bound by any rule to do so. It's just a management expectation management. And I have to declare once again that my lawsuit with Mr. CY Leung is public information. Some newspapers reported it in the headlines. And under ROP 84, we have voting of withdrawal in case of direct pecuniary interest. That is, the member can choose to refrain from voting or to withdraw. So I wonder how come members have not taken a middle-of-the-road approach. Why have they at once asked me to withdraw? I can refrain from commenting on many matters. I can be asked not to vote on a matter, but we have never discussed ROP 84. Of course, 84 is about a case of direct pecuniary interest. That's jurisprudence number 1. And on the 18th of May 2017, I sought legal advice. Of course, it is under professional privilege, and that is on whether I should withdraw from this SC. Let me repeat once again that this is not a committee of inquiry. Rather, it is a select committee set up under a petition. It is a select committee. This is not the court. This is not a magistracy, and this is not. We do not have the right to summons witnesses. This is very different from the SC setup to look into the Lehman Brothers incidents. I sought legal advice on whether I should withdraw from this, and this is the legal advice I received.
And will be understood as bearing that you 呢個字係指我本身 deliberately refrain from doing something in my capacity and or role as a member of the select committee in exchange for, emphasis, in exchange for the discontinuing of the action of HCA 533 of 2017. 呢個係我同梁振英之間嗰個誹謗事件嗰個案件嘅編號。
That's the case number of the lawsuit between myself and CY Leung. That is, I must not withdraw because the public may have the misunderstanding that my withdrawal from this is in exchange for non-action.
Crime 刑事罪行啊，主席 of misconduct in public office 呢一個係我攞到嘅法律意見。
不過我想答唔對啫，雖然馬逢國議員咁。
Now this is the legal advice I received. Now although against the background of Mr. Ma Wong Kwok's advice, you're saying that your withdrawal from this SC will give a public perception that it is something for exchange of non-action, even though without any bargaining between the two parties. Yes, the public.
對於案件個當事人嘅 non-action
And the fact that I withdraw from this may give the public perception that it is in exchange for a non-action. So even though there is no agreement between you and the other side, then your withdrawal from this may constitute a possible common law crime of misconduct in public office. Yes, this is the legal advice I receive, and the legal advice is very clear. All right, that is a legal point. All right, I'm done with the legal point from a legal point of view, and as the third reason why I insist to stay is defamation lawsuit has a very low threshold. You may say that, well, you have money and you can send a letter. I am in an entirely passive position. Whether there is a prima facie case will never be known. Somebody who can afford it can ask a lawyer to write a letter. So I am in a passive position throughout. Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Ma Wong Kwok, you may not be happy with what I'm doing, but I just want to sort out the logic. Many people may not understand what is meant by a prima facie case. Of course, no, this is not really a legal interpretation. It's just my own reasoning. I don't want people to have the misunderstanding that nothing can be done. If the other party has not got a prima facie case, you can apply to have the case struck off. Mr. Ma Wong Kwok, I'm sorry, I don't think you need to explain on behalf of Mr. Kenneth Leung or ask him to explain. If do you really know what is meant by strike off, Mr. Ma Wong Kwok? I don't really have to answer this question. I just want to say that if I am just a puppet here, then I'm not doing my duty. My duty is to help you to narrow down the scope and sort things right and clarify things.
Well, if you go on like that, we will have more meetings, and yet we are not done with our work. My lawyer told me that I will create a perception among the public if I now withdraw. I am refraining from doing something, and people will query whether there will be misconduct in public office in exchange. Well, and this is done in exchange for a non-action on the part of Mr. CY Leung. So that's their legal opinion. This is not a view 100% certain. They want us to take this into account. I won't repeat about the point about low threshold. The fourth point, if you look at the terms of reference of the Select Committee, we would be looking in whether the payments were taxable under the laws of Hong Kong. Now, on the crux of the lawsuit, we are not talking about the ICAC's involvement. We are talking about whether inland relevant revenue authorities are investigating into the matter. And on Arm 3, I have never expressed my opinion. And in October 2014, I wrote a couple of articles. I said I don't know whether the payment was taxable or not. We had to study into that. I still maintained that thinking now. So if you query that whether I have a prior position on that, I could refrain from making any comments in relation to Roman letter 3. And I hope that the experts can be called in to give evidence, because point 3 is about law. Now, fifthly, people are comparing this Select Committee to, say, a tribunal or a court. As I said, no, that's not a good analogy at all. I've talked about the legal issues, and in terms of reasoning, I would like to say something. On the 16th of June, the information coordinator Andrew Fong wrote an article in AM 730, and on the 30th of March, CY Leung appointed myself as the chairman of the MPFA, and that is it, the 30th of March 2017. Mr. CY Leung appointed people based on their merits, and Mr. Kenneth Leung gladly accepted the appointment. So matters should be treated differently, separately, and there is no sort of ill feeling between the two persons. So I've laid out all the factors here. Mr. Wong Kwok-kin said in his letter there is a conflict of interest, and Dr. Leung said that litigation costs may be involved, damages may be involved, but I don't see how the conclusion of the Select Committee can be related to the decision of the defamation case, and I don't see any monetary gain on my part at all. If you just say that there is a conflict of interest in the role, then I can accept it unwillingly. But then if you talk about pecuniary interest, then I don't think there is any element there. What about the litigation costs? Well, but that has nothing to do with the or there is no correlation between that with the conclusions drawn up by the Select Committee. So there is no relationship there at all. So this is my view. Chairman, you may disagree with me, that's all right. I want to play the role of somebody testing your remarks, because members of the public may not totally get what you said, and maybe clarifications are needed in certain of your remarks. Now, in relation to a lawsuit, maybe you would like to get materials from, say, the Select Committee to help with your case in the lawsuit, right? I can't do that. If I do that, well, the lawyer from the other party will not allow me to do so. If I want to use the materials from this Select Committee, I will have to get the consent from the Select Committee, and I will also have to get the approval from the judge of the case. Well, it's not just about the materials, but the information, say, you get in the process of the inquiry. Well, I think I will be getting more materials from that lawsuit than the materials obtained from the Select Committee. So, you said that you would not like to disclose materials related to your lawsuit. So unfortunately, we will not be able to get the benefit of the materials get the materials from the lawsuit to help with our work. In the discovery, I don't know how to put it in Chinese. I don't want to disclose the documents. I have asked Mr. CY Leung to disclose the materials that he has. And I can only use those materials at the lawsuit. And if I want to make available such materials for the Select Committee, I have to obtain the approval from the judge, and that's totally impossible. Clarification of ROP 84, one point. And that has to do with voting or withdrawal in case of direct pecuniary interest. Say, if the member has a direct pecuniary interest, except the case where his interest is in common with the rest of the population of Hong Kong or a sector thereof, his vote he cannot cast a vote, and thus. And for 83A, it has to do with direct and indirect pecuniary interest. But for 84, it's just about direct pecuniary interest. I'm quoting ROP 84 just to say that there may be other approaches that you can adopt to deal with the matter. It's not just saying that I'm the black sheep of the family, and then you have to go. I'm sure that there are some other ways of dealing with the matter. Now, I said that Mr. Kenneth Leung would speak for the last time, but then Mr. Alvin Young and one other member would like to speak. Mr. Andrew Wang, do you want to say something more? After you've spoken, I will also ask Mr. Kenneth Leung to respond to what you said, if he wants to do so. Chairman. Is it the case that this agenda item doesn't have to be dealt with? No. The pro-establishment members are changing their stance all the time. And they know that really it doesn't involve any conflict of interest. And he said that it's just a matter of poor perception. And also because any motion or resolution passed is not binding, so that the matter cannot be dealt with properly. And the pro-establishment members are giving some suggestions for Mr. Kenneth Leung to consider. So I think that we have a full discussion on that. So what's the way forward then, Chairman? Mr. Wong Kwok-kin has given us a letter, and he seems to be moving a motion here. Of course, we can make a decision of not putting this matter to the vote or passing a resolution or motion on that. And I have the power to decide or not to handle this. Legal advisor, any supplement from you, Chairman? There have been precedents in cases where the members have moved a no confidence motion on the chairman. These are non-binding motions, and these motions have been really handled in the past. So we don't see any legal hurdles of not proceeding with what we wanted to do. Mr. Stephen Ho, please be brief. After you have spoken, I have to ask Mr. Kenneth Leung to respond. Mr. Kenneth Leung said that there is a risk of him withdrawing from the committee. Now, if I move the motion that since Mr. Kenneth Leung is involved in a lawsuit, then we move a motion to ask him to leave, then would that risk be mitigated if we do that? Mr. Kenneth Leung, do you want to respond to the remarks made by the members? Because he said the legal advice is that there is a risk for him to withdraw voluntarily. I see that there is a risk for him to stay on as well. So that's why I was making my suggestion. Well, thank you for your concern about me, Mr. Ho. There is a risk to every approach. I fully understand that. And Chairman, you said that if we want to pass a motion, then that's all right. Let's go by the procedures. I won't spend extra money to seek another piece of legal advice. And I have nothing to respond to Mr. Ho's remarks. And Mr. Wong Kwok-kin, because you started the matter, so you are the advocate of this issue, so you want to say something more? I think we have fully expressed our views in relation to Mr. Kenneth Leung's staying on or not. Mr. Kenneth Leung spoke about the legal advice, and you know that in Hong Kong, if you seek advice from 10 lawyers, you may come up with 10 different pieces of legal advice. That's so normal, it's nothing unusual. I am asking Mr. Kenneth Leung to resign from the Select Committee, and that's because I have been mindful about the credibility of the Select Committee and the public perception of us. And I don't come with a malicious intent whatsoever. I would like to respond to Mr. Alvin Young's and Mr. Lam Chuk-ting's points. They said that I have not responded to certain points. I have said openly many times now, if the members have joined this committee and then the members are then subsequently taken to court, then should all of them resign from the committee? I think these are extreme hypothetical situations, and we have to consider also whether the reason for taking you to the court is related to the matter discussed in the Select Committee. And in relation to the case of Mr. Kenneth Leung versus Mr. Leung Chun-ying, the essence of that case is on UGL, and this Select Committee is looking into the UGL incident. So this is there is a direct relationship between the two. Well, Mr. Lam Chuk-kin, you can sort of sue me over UGL, but I believe you won't be able to find any evidence to back you up in doing so. So let's not say quote extreme cases. That's meaningless. Let's try to deal with factors which may do harm to the work of the Select Committee in our work ahead. So let's try to get rid of those hurdles. Now, direct interest, interest, as mentioned in my letter, interest covers a wide scope. Maybe that has to do with money, or maybe certain, you may be able to affect views in the media, public perception, whether you will affect that will be a factor to be considered by the court and so on. All these are covered under the ambit of interest. And if Mr. Kenneth Leung speaks openly about the case and so on, that may affect public perception as well. And we can never be sure that what Mr. Leung is going to say in the future will affect the lawsuit. And you are protected by PMP as well, so you can make whatever remarks you like here. You are sort of bound only by your own moral principles in what you say. So whether you leave or not under the existing system, there is all your decision, and there is no way that we can have control over your decision. So at least I think the Select Committee should be given an opportunity to express our stance on the matter.
And as the legal advisor said, if it is a vote of no confidence, the chairman must deal with it. But I don't want to move a vote of no confidence. It hurts our feelings. So I really hope that we can vote on this resolution. So many members have likened this SC to the court. This is because, Chairman, you have acted too much like a judge. I agree with Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. Of course, you are free to act as you like, Chairman, but we have a very strong feeling in this SC. You are arguing with each and every member of this SC. Of course, this is something to do with your personality. To avoid unnecessary dispute, I will not comment on your comments anymore. All right. I've already given you ample time to speak, and the two members concerned, i.e. Mr. Kenneth LEUNG and Mr. Wong Kwok-kin, have responded. I don't recommend further responses from other members, otherwise there will be no end to this discussion. All right. On the 18th of May, you sent us a letter, Mr. Wong Kwok-kin. There is no formal resolution. If you don't mind, I'll just read out the last sentence of your letter so that will be the resolution. In order not to affect the credibility of this committee, I propose that the SC demands Mr. Kenneth LEUNG to resign. Will you agree that this is the wording of your resolution? All right. Unless there are other requests, I will just do this by a show of hands. For those in favor of Mr. Wong Kwok-kin's resolution, hands up, please. Do I have to read out the names? All right. All right. All right. It's okay. I did ask. Anyway, you claim it's a vision. Mr. Wong Kwok-kin, Mr. Ma Fong Kwok, Dr. Junius Ho, Eunice Young, Mr. Stephen Ho, and Dr. Priscilla Leung for the motion. Those against, please raise their hands. Mr. Lam Chek-ting, Mr. Kenneth Leung, Mr. Alvin Young, and Mr. Andrew Wen oppose. So the motion is carried. Yes? Those who have a direct pecuniary interest should not take part in the voting. So my question is, should Mr. Kenneth Leung be allowed to vote? You, by pecuniary interest, I think the scope is too wide. I don't really want to refuse. I don't agree that there is a conflict of interest here because everyone here have spoken. No, I just want to clarify, is it your ruling that Mr. Kenneth Leung can vote on such a motion? Oh, sorry, I misunderstood your point. Does any one of you object to the fact that decides that Mr. Kenneth Leung should not vote? Chairman, just want to clarify. Should it be for members to decide or for the chairman to decide in accordance with the ROP on whether a member should vote on a particular item? Well, when such a request is made by a member, the chairman has to make a decision. And I don't see any need in this resolution to require Mr. Kenneth Leung to be excused. All right, the secretary has something to remind me. The secretary has just reminded me that I've already announced the voting results. If you have any opposition, I hope you will raise it before I announce the results, because it's too late by the time I've announced the results. And Dr. Junius Ho said that he might have an AOB item. Now, if you are going to move any motion resolution, please give us the wording in writing ASAP. All right, we will go on to the next agenda item, our AOS proposed area of study. On the 29th of March and the 25th of April, we had a discussion of the proposed areas of studies drafted by our secretary. And then on the 18th of May, Mr. CY Leung wrote to this SC proposing that the following be added, or rather that the proposed areas of study should be amended as he suggested. I will not read out his suggestion here. And the Secretariat has studied the request by Mr. Leung, and he's of the view that 1D and E of our current draft has thoroughly covered Mr. CY Leung's proposal, and the proposed areas of study have been drafted in neutral wording as far as possible. So, members, do we want to comment on this? So, in principle, we go by the first draft of the Secretary without any amendments proposed by Mr. Holden Chow or any other member. So we will adopt the Secretary's draft. Mr. Leung Kwok-kin, we have many versions. Just table. We have a paper table CB2/16. That is the revised version as at the 1st of March. I'd like to know whether it is from the Secretariat itself or from anyone, because I suggest that we use the original version as drafted by the Secretary, because if there is any amendments incorporated, then there may be repetition of Mr. Holden Chow's incident. People may challenge us for amending the areas of study. Well, that is the final version updated by the Secretary on the 29th of March. When we first discussed this paper, it was at the meeting dated the 3rd of March, and some members expressed some views on the draft, and then based on comments made, we revised the draft. On the 29th of March, the revised version was circulated, and there were further comments made on that day, and then there was another meeting in April. So it is a consolidation of comments made by members on the 3rd of March. So I'd like to know whether the views incorporated include the points made by our former member, Mr. Holden Chow. If the answer is yes, I'm afraid that will include the wish of Mr. CY Leung. Can the Secretariat please clarify? Or should we go for the first version dated the 3rd of March so that we won't have this worry? Yes, I know that you might be worried, but then can the Secretariat confirm if it is just technical, if the amendments are technical in nature, then we can go for the version dated the 29th of March. Can the Secretariat confirm? Can you read out the paper number? Yes, please read out the paper number. The first draft was issued on the 3rd of March for members' discussion. Some textual amendments in view of members' comments. And on the 27th of March, we issued another paper. That's paper number CB21078/1617-01 and the appendix to it. If members asked whether views of individual members have been incorporated, we'll have to check our notes of meetings first, because members have already confirmed the notes of meetings or minutes of meetings. The first draft was dated the 1st of March, and the second is the 27th of March. I think they are just some textual amendments, correcting the typos, for instance. So if members agree that this is not really a controversial version, can we use the version dated the 27th of March as the basis? Well, I have both versions here. I've done a comparison, and there are quite a lot of amendments. There are additional paragraphs because it's been a few months since. So I don't know how much of the second version is from Mr. Hon Chow. I have a very strong impression that Hon Chow's views were influenced by CY Leung, the subject of our inquiry. Back then, we didn't know that there was such close liaison between Hon Chow and CY Leung, and that the former was reflecting the views of the latter, and we were misled into thinking that it was Hon Chow's independent view, and we accepted it. For the sake of the credibility of this SC, we have to be very careful. We have to find out things that are unacceptable. If you ask me, Chairman, I think the simplest way to do it is to accept the first draft by the Secretary dated the 3rd of March. Back then, we all found it acceptable. So to avoid other issues, we may go for the first version, because I'm worried that there might be other documents to review, that even Hon Chow's proposed amendments were the work of CEO's CE. The Secretariat has checked the minutes of meetings very quickly, and indeed some of the proposals were made by the former Deputy Chairman Hon Chow, but they were just regrouping. But I do understand your point. We should have presented you with the first and second drafts for you to consider. I have read both, although I do not see major problems with that, but it's not for me to say. So if members agree, we'll take a short break of 5 minutes so that you can compare the two versions to avoid possible disputes. So can I ask the Secretariat to give us the first and second versions for members to compare? A short break of 5 minutes, please.